I grew up in Miami, South Florida. Initially, we lived in Hialeah, which is full of Cubans, and then we moved to Little Havana, and that's where that's the last place that I lived in before moving to New York. As far as the guitar is concerned, when I started playing guitar, I much like other young guitarists, the initial door that you walk through is of rock and roll. And at that time, when I was a teenager, the grunge movement and some metal bands were very important. And MTV was a huge thing, so I was exposed to a lot of this stuff through MTV. Stemming from the influences that my dad was providing for me, whether he knew it or not, and also bridging it with all the grunge and all of the rock and roll that I was listening to, and I was getting into blues and all types of stuff. I was also, because of Tchaikovsky and all the classical music that my dad was playing, I was also really into Beethoven and Bach, and I really started exploring all of this classical music. And I was even getting into classical guitar and putting all of those influences together, the rock and roll, the classical music, and the jazz. Then I started getting into a deeper study of the guitar, and I started listening to and transcribing a lot of Wes Montgomery, which was a giant influence. In fact, through my mid-teens, I attended a performing arts high school, New World School of the Arts. So there I had an opportunity to really just focus on guitar. So I was trying to be a Wes Montgomery clone for the longest time. And then by the time I got to senior year of high school, I started opening up my mind, and I started listening to music from the 60s and 70s, jazz fusion and all that stuff, and I started really branching out. And currently, after all that time that passed, I don't even identify with those initial influences, Wes Montgomery, Grant Green, and Pat Martino. I took a lot of information from them, but I've gone so far away from that now I've stepped into my own sound and my own vocabulary that was already taking shape 15, 16 years ago. So I was able to develop my own sound through basically not being able to follow directions exactly from my guitar teachers. One of my most important guitar teachers was Mike DeLito. So my influences are coming from my earliest relationship with music that is directly related to my father. And my father is very into music, and he played all kinds of recordings at home, from Glenn Miller to Billie Holiday to Tchaikovsky was his favorite, the Nutcracker is his favorite, and then also Cuban music, of course. I was born in Cuba. So he really indirectly shaped my musical subconscious in a way that can be seen even today, can be heard today. And then aside from that, I attended a performing arts high school, New World School of the Arts, very amazing high school. Unfortunately, I think they're cutting funding, and I think that, anyway, that's a whole nother, that's happening all over the place. So my guitar teacher at that time, I had several guitar teachers, but the one that I had throughout my high school career his name was Mike DeLito, and he's the director of the Miami-Dade Community College. Incredible guitarist, classical guitarist, and jazz guitarist, which is uncommon. To play both at a high level is very uncommon. So the guy is phenomenal. And the reason why I think I developed my own sound was because I couldn't understand certain parts of the lesson. And what he wanted me to do at that time, he was very much into the chord scale approach, which is a very useful and effective way of going about improvising. Jamie Aebersold, J.B. Dias, and all those that type of pedagogical approach. He wanted me to take solos, the solos I was transcribing, and utilize the licks and plug them into my solos. And this is also something that is very common when you're learning to improvise, is that you take other people's vocabulary and then you literally cut and paste and you use that in your solo. But I was never really able to do that. I was never able to take someone else's work, I don't know why, and really apply it in my solos. I never memorized these licks. So what ended up happening is that I developed my own creative process from the very beginning. And I think that's very important. For me, it's more important to listen, transcribe, and to emulate the feeling of the improvisation, or whomever it is that you're playing along with. I transcribed a lot of John Coltrane, Wes Montgomery, Grant Green, McCoy Tyner, and I mean a bunch of different instruments. But I never consciously took those phrases and used them in my solo. I could never do that. But I still, I was able to capture the essence of what was being played in a very intuitive and organic way. So that is how I developed a very organic and unique sound, essentially. The one drawback with having a very unique sound is that if they can't categorize you because you have your own sound. So even if I go and try and play bebop with a bunch of straight ahead players, even though I am stylistically addressing what is being played, I'm not going to sound like your traditional bebop because I'm approaching it from my own filter, from my own sound. I'm not copying. I never copied anything. So it's difficult to categorize that, and that's why unique work sometimes takes such a long time to break through, because no one can categorize you. You're not part of a. You sound different. You know, one of my favorite players is Joe Henderson, and whenever you listen to Joe's playing, he's really stretching, and he has his own sound. Even though he's playing bebop and he comes from that school, he has his own vocabulary, and he's very creative. And he doesn't try to sound like Sonny Rollins, or he doesn't try to sound like Charlie Parker, even though they're coming from that same lineage. Or he doesn't try to sound like Coleman Hawkins. He sounds like Joe Henderson. And he really, it's a beautiful thing to hear. Well, Joe Henderson was a huge influence. Even though I didn't transcribe Joe, I listened to endless amounts of Joe Henderson. So I feel that through listening, he really crept up that originality, that ferocity, that unrelenting fire that is always on 150% no matter what. So let me tell you about my band, the Richard Padrón group, and it ended up being RPG. I'm not trying to copy PMG, which is the Pedrito Martinez group, which is a friend of mine, an incredible singer and percussionist. But I was putting up a tab on my website for Richard Padrón group, and it's too long to fit, so I just ended up shortening it RPG. So that's the reason for that, and I think it can be catchy. So this started a very long time ago in trio format. As soon as as early as I started composing. So I was always very interested in composing, and I started composing music when I was 17, 16 years old. So I have compositions that are still being played in my group that are from that era, and that's how it all started. I was initially started as a trio, and I kept on composing music, and I moved to New York, and at that time I had it really took shape when I was given the opportunity to be the musical director of the Miami-Dade Community Jazz Combo in 2003. Right before moving to New York, actually, and we had a chance to go to Italy. That was my first trip overseas to play a major jazz festival, and I wrote all the music. So that's essentially where it started. It was all at that time. I was still writing in the style of American swing jazz. I wasn't even trying to get into my roots yet. I wasn't trying to write anything like that. It wasn't coming out. So that's how it started, and then now it developed into what it is today, which is a sextet. and we're with two vocalists, and I basically now it's a mixture of my original instrumental compositions. A really good friend of mine, Marley Gilbert, wrote lyrics to a few of the tunes, which are these. All this music is going to be featured on my debut record through next year, and now it's a mixture of it's all Cuban, Afro-Cuban folkloric rhythms with my original unique take on compositional harmony and melody, and that's basically where it is now. And we're playing shows. We've been playing shows at the Iridium. We played a show at the Iridium. Now we're playing at Minton's. A couple shows at Minton's, Fat Cat, and in trio format we're playing at the bar next door. So we've been slowly but surely, without a record, we've been already playing live shows, and I'm writing more music. There's a whole nother record already in production. I record everything at home. I have a really nice recording studio at home that I've basically turned my entire apartment into a recording studio. So the first opportunity that I had to go overseas was with the Metro Parks Honors Jazz Band. We went to the Bahamas. I might have been 18 or something. I was still in high school. And the second opportunity was the Umbria Jazz Festival, where I was writing the music for the Miami-Dade Community College Jazz Combo. And that was an incredible experience. I mean, we did a tour of Italy for about 2 weeks, just different cities, just playing. And that was a phenomenal experience. And then I moved to New York, and then I went to Morocco with Wunmi, who's a Afrobeat Nigerian artist. With my group, I was able to go to Ouro Preto in Brazil, which was my very first time in Brazil. Not that many people go to Ouro Preto, but there was a jazz festival there, Tudo é Jazz, and I was able to go with my trio and play on that stage, that is on the top 5 experiences in my life. So naturally, with a studio at home and being a composer and really having been into electronic music from a very early age and music production, all that entire process, I took an interest in film composing. And I was able to initially find my first film scoring gig on Craigslist. This independent short called Sacrificios, by Miguel Munguia, written by Miguel Munguia. I think he's living in California now, doing really big things. And it was about a story, a very sad story about a Mexican immigrant that somehow lent his friend his papers, and then his friend didn't come back in time, and then he got stopped by a cop, and they took him in, but he didn't have his heart medicine, and then the guy had a heart attack and died, and so that was the subject matter. So music and film. Music is a giant part of a movie. If you try to watch a movie without music, it ends up being it doesn't actually make sense. Silent films had music, right? So that's where it started. It wouldn't be very interesting if it didn't have any dialogue and no music. It would just be this strange, mime game essentially. So that was my first film that I scored, but it ended up being with very little resources. I was able to use my skills and apply them and bring emotion and texture and color to the images. So far, the most important one that's received the most accolades is called What's Left, and that written by Marley Gilbert, incredible playwright, incredible writer. She's beyond talented actress, and it's also a very dark subject. It's about an inmate that had a relationship, pen pal program, where she was corresponding with the husband of the wife that she killed, but the guy didn't know that the inmate was responsible for his wife's death. So I had to essentially watch the film and bring out the subtleties, the nuances, and the emotion that was being displayed and put that into music, essentially. So my first recording gig in New York City was with Michael Mossman. And I met Michael Mossman, who is a very important teacher at Queens College. I met him at Birdland a very long time ago. And I kept on sitting in with the Arturo, what at that time was still the Chico O'Farrell big band, which is now the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra or something to that effect. And I kept on sitting in, and Michael took notice, and he hired me for a recording session. So I didn't know what to expect. So I was living in Astoria at the time, which I'm living in Astoria. So I go to what's that place called? Kensington, I think it was. I forget the studio. And I walk into the studio, and there is Arturo Farrell, Antonio Hart, Michael Mossman. I can't remember who was on drums and bass, but it doesn't matter. So that was, I was so nervous, that was my first recording gig. So through that experience with Michael Mossman, as intimidating as it was, I kept on working with Michael for a bit of time. We played at the Kennedy Center. No, wait. It's not. No, we played in Washington, D.C. For the jazz festival down there a couple years in a row. And there, Charlie Fishman put me in touch with Paquito de Rivera. And then that's how I started playing with Paquito. And I was able to, I grew up listening to Paquito, right? So that by far was one of the most inspirational and important experiences. As far as my discography is concerned, I first had to think about it last year or earlier this year when I was putting my current website together, which is still just in the works. And I counted that I recorded, since in New York, I recorded on 16 or so records. Off the top of my head, the first records that I recorded was with Benny Reed. Benny Reed is an alto saxophone player, and I met him at Smalls or somewhere, and he ended up being signed to Concord Records, and we recorded 2 or 3 records for Concord, but something happened that it just fizzled away. And one of my favorite recording sessions was in Connecticut at I believe it's called the Barn or the Red Barn. I can't remember the name of the studio. I wish I could remember more things, but it was with Charles Flores. Unfortunately, he passed a few years ago. But I shared the roster with Elio Villafranca and Cliff Allman, who's one of my favorite drummers, and recording all of Charles's music, and actually met Charles playing with Paquito de Rivera. And one of the other musicians was Wayne Krantz, who's a legend, Wayne Krantz. So that was something to be in the same studio with all these incredible, legendary musicians. Nice.